Ready?
Hey guys, welcome back to LinguaBees, the podcast where we explore linguistics through diverse perspectives. I'm Daniel and I'm here with Brisa and Yesenia. Today we're honored to speak with a truly inspiring guest, Lisa Richlen. Lisa is a researcher, educator, and advocate with over 2 decades of experience in human rights and social change. Originally from Seattle, she spent 21 years living in Israel working closely with Palestinian communities. Her journey has taken her through academic research, community organization, and conflict resolution training. She holds a master's in social education learning and a PhD from Ben Gurion University. Now, based in Canada, Lisa works with conflict resolution and skills training. Lisa, welcome to LinguaBase. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. We're honored.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to be on the podcast.
So, Lisa, your work has taken you across countries, cultures, and complex contexts. So, let's start with your time in Israel. What drew you to work in the field of human rights, especially within Palestinian communities?
So, I'm Jewish and I grew up with a very strong Jewish identity in the United States. Of course, most Americans are Christian, so I was a minority in the United States. Part of the reason I moved to Israel is because Israel's national and religious culture is Jewish. There in Israel, I was part of the majority. I also grew up in a very politically liberal and progressive environment with a strong orientation towards social justice. That is why I became involved in human rights and social change work. Generally, minorities or those who are marginalized in some way from the mainstream are more in need of protections in Israel, and that is often non Jews. So many human rights organizations work with and on behalf of non Jews, including Palestinians. In my case, I work with Palestinian citizens of Israel. So they are about 20% of Israeli citizens. I also worked a lot with asylum seekers from Sudan in Africa who aren't entitled to refugee status in Israel. I also worked on behalf of migrant workers. My personal preference is to work for and with organizations founded by those communities, since I believe that they know what is best for their own communities.
That sounds very interesting. That lead me to the next question. So, during your time in Israel, where you were so involved in language education, right? So, how did working with second language learners depend on your understanding of identity and power dynamics?
So, when one can speak in their native language, they have access to rights, they have access to the labor market, and to feelings of belonging. In the case of Israel, almost everything official, including in higher education, is in Hebrew and not Arabic. So that can make it harder for Arabic speakers to realize their rights and feel a sense of belonging in Israel. Language is also very much tied to and associated with identity. In Israel, the status of Arabic is symbolic of the status of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel. Therefore, Arab citizens have less power and privilege in Israeli society. I can give one example of this. I managed a project where we sought to increase the presence of Arabic in Israeli universities. For Arabs in Israel, their first language is Arabic. This is the language they speak in their towns and villages, and also that they study in during their primary education. But Israeli universities are in Hebrew, and you also need English in order to succeed academically. That means that they need to know four languages: spoken and written Arabic, which are like two different languages, and also Hebrew and English. Therefore, they often feel alienated and discriminated against when they enter Israeli universities. In our project, we try to increase the presence of Arabic in signs, in conferences and courses, and for example, in something as simple as computer keyboards in Arabic. We also engaged in some advocacy, encouraging universities to recognize Arab student unions, for example, and to make sure that Muslim and Christian holidays are official holidays in the academic calendar. This is a practical example of how one group of people, Arab Palestinians, students in universities in Israel, are disadvantaged because of their language and their national belonging.
Well, Lisa, this is very interesting what you share, mainly because here in the podcast, some of us are currently working with second language learners. So it's very interesting to talk about identity and these power dynamics that go on while they're learning. And it's important also for our listeners to know that this happens and how you can address this issue. So that's very interesting. Now, we're going to go into a little bit more of your teaching and the courses that you have done. So you've taught courses on race, ethnicity, and social inequality at several Canadian universities. And how do your lived experiences in Israel and your academic background shape how you approach these subjects?
Wow, it's such a huge topic, and it was really hard for me to think about how to answer this question. So I gave it a shot. We'll see what you think. Living in many different countries has made me more sensitive to these dynamics because each time you move, you see how cultures are and can be structured differently. And in each society, groups of people are regarded differently. Using myself as an example, I've moved countries twice. First from the US to Israel, and then from Israel to Canada. In Israel, I was regarded as American, of course, because of my accent in Hebrew. I moved to Canada as a citizen and as a native English speaker, so that helps me more than many of my friends who are African asylum seekers in Israel, but are refugees in Canada. I also think my friendships and PhD fieldwork with my Sudanese friends really influenced me. I'm a white person with 3 citizenships who research young African Muslim men from villages. So this forces you to think all the time about inequalities globally and how fortunate I am that I was born and raised in the United States, where by virtue of birth, I have so many advantages and privileges. These days, I am grateful every single day that I have the privilege of Canadian citizenship. On the other hand, working so closely with Palestinians and also people from Sudan always reminds me of how much humans have in common. For example, with my Palestinian friends in Israel, I can relate to the experience of being a minority since I grew up as a Jewish minority in the United States. With my Sudanese friends in Israel and now those who are in Canada, despite my privileges, we have so much in common adjusting to life in a new country.
Wow, this is very interesting. And yes, the adjustment that you do when you live in different countries and what goes on. So you share these experiences mainly with the skill training that you do currently. So that's very interesting. And now moving on a little bit into human rights and social change, you've also worked in this area. What were some of the biggest challenges for you?
So when I think of my nearly 20 years working with for and with human rights and social change organizations in Israel, I think about all of the work that we did and how everyone can see in the news every single day. Unfortunately, the human rights situation just keeps getting worse. We faced, and my colleagues in Israel continue to face, a lot of challenges. I think one of our biggest failings was changing public opinion. We, as a sector in Israel, don't represent the Israeli public. And that sector, the human rights sector, doesn't know how to speak to the larger Israeli public, at least in my view. Changing public views is hard and frustrating work, as anyone who has that irritating uncle knows. This is one of the reasons why I think learning about conflict is so important. Talking to people who have different views from us usually generates conflict. If we don't know how to build relationships that we need in order to bridge social divisions, we won't be very effective at social change as I see it. I think another challenge is staying resilient in the face of setbacks. It can be easy to get discouraged and give up. Some people do give up. I think that people need to be engaged because they believe it is the right thing for them rather than because they want to see results. I think this requires that each person get in touch with their inner motivations for doing the work and the ways in which the process rather than the results can give them satisfaction. Using me as an example, one of my strengths is relating to people who are different from me and creating connections across difference. This is what keeps me engaged. And even despite all of the challenges these days between Jews and Palestinians, this is what gives me sense. Their source of motivation is probably different.
Well, now that we've been talking about all this conflict resolution, and I mean, actually, since we're a podcast that is mainly based on language learning and how important it is going to be in order to solve conflict, I have I have a question related to your work focused on conflict resolution and skill
Mhm.
training. So regarding law enforcement students. So
Mhm.
what do you think it's important to bring these practices into law enforcement education?
When I think about law enforcement, I think about state or government power and how governments can use their power to help or harm us. I also think a lot about the police in the United States and Israel. And generally, these are negative associations. While there's always diversity in a group, I think that when you have a gun and the backing of the law or the government, it makes it easier to abuse power. Many people's interactions with their government is through police and law enforcement, for good or for bad. The way in which these agencies treat people is a reflection of the governments that they work for. They model and demonstrate public norms and values. Therefore, I am very happy that in British Columbia, where I live, in the province of British Columbia, it is important that law enforcement agencies want those who are working with them to learn skills related to peaceful and non-force-based methods of resolving conflicts. In the courses we teach, we emphasize using verbal de-escalation skills like empathy and active listening instead of relying on force to get the public they interact with to comply. This creates societies that value dialogue and want to promote peace over violence.
Well, actually, I loved something like that happened here in
Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just having this police officers that sadly in most cases want you to do everything they say just because they have the power and that's it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Look, you have people like that everywhere, right? But
yes,
certainly
exactly.
there is a tendency, I think, of people who go into policing who want more, like it, are attracted to it because they feel they have more power. Yeah,
Exactly. Yes. And
yeah.
that's something very related to emotional intelligence because,
Mhm.
like when you have the power, you think like you can do everything
Yeah.
and no matter what. And this leads me to my next question. So, which is how does social emotional learning help people deal with conflict, especially in stressful or difficult situations?
Well, I think it is important to teach academic knowledge like reading, writing, and math. I also think that teaching people how to communicate, how to manage their emotions, and how to cooperate with others is important, is just as important, if not more important. This is the basis of social and emotional learning. It is especially hard to cooperate, manage our emotions, and communicate constructively when we are under pressure or stress. Therefore, if we can learn these skills and practice them during more normal times, it can be easier for us to apply these practices during stressful or difficult situations. Specifically, as it relates to strong emotions, we often react or respond instinctively. However, when we have awareness of how we act in those situations, we can break the action reaction cycle. It can help us to make different choices about how we act in the world. If we can change the way we act or behave, we have more control over the outcomes we might want in life.
This is so interesting, Lisa, because we are in a second language, and how do you teach this? Mainly when we have students that are going to go into a different culture, and how can they handle these situations? So the best we can do is train them for their skills and in a more relaxed environment where they can reflect, where they can be like, okay, what would I do if I have this case? What can I do if I am in this situation? So this is interesting because some of our students go to a different country and they have to learn how to solve these conflicts with people, or here in Guanajuato where we have so many people coming from different places, how to also solve these situations here in Mexico. I always highlight this to my students because sometimes they ask themselves if they're going to use English here in Mexico. And I say yes, yes, because we have people coming from different countries into Mexico
Like
and they
me,
want
and
to
I don't
know,
speak Spanish.
yes, and especially in Guanajuato, there's so many
Yeah.
people that come here for the tourism. So I always mention that it's important to know how to solve these conflicts if they have or if they face any. Okay, so we have as our audience, we have some students, teachers. So for educators and students listening, what advice would you give the navigating dialogues across culture or ideological differences? Because they do face this most of the times.
Yeah, that's a difficult one, right? It can be very challenging. I would suggest that people always be humble and to be curious and always want to learn. I think that people are people and we have more in common than things that divide us. I also think that it is important to have a firm and positive identity that isn't dependent on the other person. If you know who you are and you are proud of who you are, you won't be threatened by difference, whether it's cultural or ideological. When you can recognize how important your identity and ideologies are to you, you can more easily identify with how important these things may be to other people, even if they are different from you. They feel differently, they have different ideological beliefs. Finally, I would say that relationships are also really important. One thing I really miss about Israel, but I struggle with in North America, is that in Israel, I have friends who are absolutely not aligned with me politically and ideologically, but we're still friends. This helps us to talk about the issues in a constructive way. In my view, it will be almost impossible to reach any consensus on any difficult issue without having a strong relationship with people who appear, at least on the surface, to be on the other side of an issue.
Yes, and this is and also so difficult how to deal with these ideological
Yeah.
differences. Um, and you come up to them and you face. And I have also friends from different countries, and it's very hard to come up to this like same idea or to even talk about ideological differences or what we think, because there's always like this issue of what one thinks and the other. And now mainly in social media where everyone shares what they think, it's just so difficult. So
Yeah,
we see this,
absolutely.
we have, or we're the ones who give that advice to our students because we're with them in the classroom, so we can expand their vision in the classroom, so they don't go up there to social media and make these posts that can be very harmful for others.
Yeah.
So we try to make or carry or do this awareness
Mhm.
in our classrooms.
You're right. That's a
And
really important role that you have.
yes, because we're there, we're with them. So we do the best that we can, give them this advice. We also talk a lot about being respectful for the ideologies of other people,
Mhm.
or else they can just go into social media and
Yeah.
do all these comments.
Yeah.
Because something that you mentioned previously in one of your workshops, because we've been to some of your workshops, is
Yeah.
that some of our students do not learn this at home. Their
Yeah.
parents do not share that they should be pathetic and that they should respect others' ideologies. So,
Mhm.
one of our important roles and why we take this topic up to the podcast is because it's important. And because
Yeah.
if they don't learn it at home, the best
Yeah.
thing that we can do is mention this in our classes and carry out this awareness.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
And something that you mentioned earlier is that you've had these moments where what keeps you going is
Mhm.
your inspiration or your passion for this. So have you moments in your work that made you feel hopeful or inspired, something specific where you don't give up on working in the area and looking at these difficult situations, which gave you more energy to keep going with this?
Yeah, to be honest, it's really hard these days to be inspired or hopeful, particularly as an Israeli and American, and as someone who's on the left of the political spectrum. I feel inspired, though, when I think about my Sudanese friends and also my Palestinian friends and colleagues and how exceptional they are. They managed to achieve amazing things in such difficult conditions with so many life challenges. My relationships with them, which haven't changed at all, despite the political reality, are and being able to be in solidarity with them and empathize with them makes me feel better when I'm feeling down about the state of the world. And I'll say just this morning, I hinted at this when I talked about Arabic and higher education in Israel. Just this morning, I got an email from someone who I worked with on that project. And, I haven't heard from her in like 5 or 8 years. And she's going on to apply for all sorts of postdocs. And I'm just people who are so exceptional and that those relationships continue over so many years. So I would say that always makes me feel good, even when it feels quite difficult sometimes.
Yes, and one sticks to this, and us as teachers, as language teachers, we also face this reality in the classroom. Sometimes it feels just so hard to continue because we're like, okay, they're not receiving this type of education at home, and we have to do all the work, and it's so
Yeah.
difficult. And we have to make our students aware of the conflict and how the different conflicts that there are in the world right now and how to face them and how to react to them because that's the most important. They're reacting spontaneously. They're reacting just what they think and they
Mhm.
don't reflect on the real issue and what this can how the
Mhm.
problem can get bigger with this reaction.
Mhm.
So it's a big role that we have and it's also very sometimes we also that it's getting harder and harder each time, but we try our
Yeah.
best
Mhm.
and to be this part of the community that wants to continue doing the change, being in an MA program and
Yeah.
trying to share this information with all the people that we can, that the people that listen to the podcast also reflect on this and think about it. So it's very great. It's to have this conversation with you to help our listeners reflect and have this talk and conversation today.
Yeah, so I think you're doing really important work, and you asked some really thought-provoking questions, which I hope will be a benefit to your listeners, who, like as you said, deal with challenging situations on a regular basis. The world is difficult and complex these days, and I think anyone who can validate that and support people in that process is really we need more people like that in the world.
Yes. And sometimes we have to teach our students more than our subject. There's so much that we have to do, even if it's
Yeah,
okay, you can say when they're children, we have to bring this up in your classroom. But even when they're adults, I was very surprised
yeah,
uh, to notice this. You sometimes say, okay, they're adults, they know how to deal with it. But then surprisingly, they don't. So you also have to bring it up and
yeah,
also have to carry out awareness with your students. No matter their age, it doesn't matter if they're children, if they're
yeah,
teenagers, if they're
yeah.
adults. We're
This
doing
is
this
what we
every day.
this is what we do at my job in Canada. We teach adults these skills that unfortunately many people don't learn as children and realize as adults how necessary they are. So, and as I like to say, and the three of you probably heard me say, every single day gives us opportunities to practice these skills.
Yes, yes, we totally. We have these challenges every day, and it gives us opportunity to put them in practice.
Yeah,
Yeah, actually, we don't teach only English because it would be like, like,
right.
all this kind of stuff. But we also have to teach how to negotiate, which is a part of the language.
Yep. Hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
uh,
That's what I teach the law enforcement students, how to
exactly.
negotiate. And
Yeah.
negotiation is a daily skill. It's not
Hmm.
only something you do in court or in labor negotiations. You do it when you're deciding where to go out to eat and how to buy a used car or a new car. And every
Hmm.
single day we negotiate.
Yeah.
Certainly in the Middle East, we negotiate all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is inherent part of the language. Well, well, Lisa, thank you very much for joining us today here and sharing your powerful insights and experiences and from human rights and your work in Israel, teaching in Canada. All this has been very, very valuable. So, yeah, your journey is a reminder of how education, empathy, and resilience can
Mhm.
shape social change. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, Brisa, and Yesenia. It was really a pleasure being invited to be on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, Lisa. Okay, so, and thank you to our listeners also for tuning into this episode of LinguaBiz. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Until next time. Déjenme la detengo, espérenme.